workers are really, really worried about is the onset of AI.
Unions are basically organizations that working people create and fund themselves.
Exactly.
They fund it themselves. I know we need policy change. I just don't think we're going to get it. Larry, I'm sick of waiting. I'm not waiting anymore.
We protect the working class and that we care about the working class.
The freedom to form unions doesn't exist in the United States. There's a human rights problem.
Okay. Rep. Levin, thank you for joining us today at the Center for American Progress Action Fund. Really appreciate you being on Union Base to talk about unions, AI, and the future of work. Thank you.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, Larry. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
So you've been one of the strongest leaders in Congress and, beyond that as an organizer talking on behalf of workers. Can you tell me, when did you decide that you want to fight on behalf of working people?
Oh, wow. I don't know. The first thing that came up was when I was a sophomore in college. I don't know how I was an activist on all kinds of issues, and somehow the staff of the old International Ladies Garment Workers Union, ILGWU, that was not about lady workers, it was the women's clothes, right? There was Act 2 was the Union of the Men's Clothes Workers, and ILG was the Women's Clothes Workers. Then they merged later to form Unite, right? So that's labor history for you. Anyway, they found me, and the company that made the caps and gowns that I went to Williams College, that Williams College used, was the workers were represented by ILGW and they were on strike.
Wow.
And not only that, the company had been founded by an alumnus of Williams College 100 years earlier. And it was just over the mountains in Troy, New York.
Okay.
And so they said to me, well, you got to do something about this. So I thought about it, and I didn't hesitate, but I think, Larry, it's really important, and this is a time of crisis right now in our country, right?
Right.
In any time of conflict or when you have to try to deal with power relations, it's important to be creative, have fun, don't just get all tense. So at that time, this is a long time ago, Larry, I'm old. This probably was 1980, I think. So streaking was a big phenomenon in America. Now, I don't know if everybody watching this or listening knows what streaking is. It means running around naked in public, but it was like a phenomenon in America then. And it was on the cover of Time magazine. And, so I wrote this petition that said, we, the undersigned seniors, pledge to go to our own commencement disrobed rather than wear these struck caps and gowns. Now, did that mean they just wouldn't wear the cap and gown, or did that mean
they didn't know
something else? It was kind of cheeky,
right?
Pun intended, and so we got, with that kind of lighthearted thing, we got a majority of the senior class to sign that petition.
Wow.
And Williams College, the administration refused to accept that our action had anything to do with it, but somehow for the first time in 100 years, they didn't use those caps and gowns.
Wow.
So we actually won that little skirmish for workers. But that, I was just really moved by the plight of those workers in Troy, New York. And then when I graduated from college, Ronald Reagan had been elected president a few years earlier. I considered that at the time to be a disaster for the American people and really the whole world. And I still, looking back, think that basically the working class of this country has been taking it on the chin since Reagan was president because of the policies he set in motion. But anyway, I graduated from college and I had the privilege of, not needing to make as much money as I possibly could. I supported myself, by working, but I said, well, let me go help workers somehow have a bigger say in this country. If we're going to change the direction of this country, which we need to, working people have to lead it. So that's what I believed in 1983, and that's what I believe today, actually. And so I got one job offer as a community organizer and one job offer as a union organizer. The community organizer position was from Heather Booth, legendary leader. At that time, she was running Citizen Action.
Okay.
And she said, well, you could start the Citizen Action chapter in Jacksonville, Florida. So I thought, well, that's pretty cool. And then SEIU, the Service Employees International Union, offered me a job to help nursing home workers organize on who were employees of Beverly Enterprises. They had like a national campaign to help Beverly Enterprise nursing home workers unionize. And you know what I thought, Larry, at that time?
What's that?
I said, look, unions are basically organizations that working people create and fund themselves.
Exactly.
They fund it themselves.
Right.
You may be a worker in a restaurant, a hospital, a county road commission, whatever you work. Mm-hmm. You pay for your own organization, and it's democratic. Mm-hmm. And I thought, I love community organizing, and that's cool, but I don't want to go raise money for my salary and just spend time on, let's build power for workers in their own organizations. And I kind of never looked back. I mean, I did that for 5 years, and then I went to various grad school and law school and was a labor activist there. And then I was the staff attorney for President Clinton's Labor Law Reform Commission after law school, and then was at the National AFL-CIO for 11 years. So really, I devoted a lot of my life to this. And that first decision to be a union organizer was the best decision I ever made, besides marrying my wife.
Wow, that's beautiful. The first time I heard about your work was during the era of the Employee Free Choice Act, the Obama era, and then, of course, the PRO Act more recently. You've been a very, very strong advocate for workers, not only in organizing, but in Congress. So what would you say is the current state of unions and, union density, particularly in this country?
Well, wow, there's a lot to say about that. But to just answer the question most directly, the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is in the U.S. Department of Labor, it's the agency that keeps track of data. Right. Hopefully we'll keep gathering data in this country. But they release their annual numbers on union density, on how many workers have a union, are represented by a union, are union members. They slice and dice it very finely in different ways. And really, for the first time in modern history, the percentage of private sector workers who are in a union went below 6%. It's been hovering around 6%, and now it's 5.9.
Wow.
I mean, Larry, that is shocking.
Absolutely.
And it's horrifying. And we have to admit, looking at how we see a lot of shoots of hope among workers, the favorability of unions, people like unions, they support unions, people of all ages, especially young people, the MIT research that says 48% of workers who don't have a union would like to have one. There's a lot of interesting stuff here. But even after the headlines about some Amazon workers trying to organize, Starbucks workers, REI, Trader Joe's, etc., and some of them are having a little success, actually in aggregate, we're going backwards.
We're still declining.
We're still declining.
Right.
So it's a huge crisis. And then if you want, we can talk about kind of the role of labor law reform in this. Because yes, I guess the two big parts of my labor career have been directly about union organizing and then about labor law reform. Right. And I guess if you think about it, on the labor law reform side, during the Clinton administration, I was a staff attorney for the Blue Ribbon Commission he created about that. I'll say that Bill Clinton wasn't very pro-union, and he didn't really very aggressively want to do something to help workers organize more easily. So instead of doing something, he created a Blue Ribbon Commission. I don't think that was a great thing for the working class, but it was good for me personally because I was a law student and my labor law professor was the counsel of the commission, and I talked my way into being a student staffer. I had a contract, third-year law school. I think I made $25 an hour with the U.S. Department of Labor. It was like, woohoo. And then after I graduated, I went into the Labor Department full-time to do that work, learned a ton, And then that was the Clinton administration. And then in the lead up to the Obama administration, I was at the National AFL-CIO, Assistant Director of Organizing. But in my last part of my 11 years there, I created and ran something for President Sweeney called the Voice at Work campaign, Voice at Work campaign. And it was about making the freedom to form unions and bargain collectively a human right and a big public policy thing. And we did write the Employee Free Choice Act, which, got a vote at least during the Obama administration. And then during the more recent wave about labor law reform, during the Biden administration, I was in Congress. And as a freshman, my chairman of the Ed and Labor Committee, Bobby Scott, and my speaker, Nancy Pelosi, said to me, a little freshman, well, you're the union organizer and the labor lawyer in Congress, so you have to lead the fight in the committee and then on the floor, or help lead it, on the PRO Act, the Protecting the Right to Organize Act. Right. Dude, that was such an honor for me
huge.
and fun. To be honest, I was the right person. I was ready.
You were.
And I had fun. And going toe to toe with the Republicans on all their ridiculous amendments they proposed in the committee. And anyway, but I'll tell you something, man. I think that the lesson of my life and trying to understand American labor history a little, which I'm not a big scholar of history, but basically the way I see it is this. We got really big labor law reform in this country one main time in 1935, the National Labor Relations Act, part of the New Deal. And after that was passed, the labor movement grew tremendously for the next 15 years, from about where we are now, something like 6%, to 35% of private sector workers and of all workers had a union in the late 40s and early 50s. 35%, right? So I think it's fair to say, well, labor law reform is very important. But lately, I've not been focusing on 1935. I've been focusing on 1932, 1933, 1934. Because like with the women's suffrage movement and the civil rights movement and the movement for gay marriage and other things, we didn't really get the final legislation or court decisions just because people like saw the light of day or realized they had a civil debate in the Congress and they said, oh, we should pass the Voting Rights Act. No, without Fannie Lou Hamer and Medgar Evers and John Lewis, not the congressman, in the streets, right. And, all the civil rights activists, bravely fighting for it, we would never have gotten the Voting Rights Act or the Civil Rights Act. And similarly, now I think like this: Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, and Joe Biden, the 4 Democratic presidents of my adult lifetime, of the last 50 years, you could even say, all had at least 2 years with Democratic control of both the House and the Senate, and none of them got labor law reform done.
Absolutely.
And what's missing is that predicate, that uprising of workers, that upsurge of people demanding the right to form a union, trying to form unions, trying to win first contracts against the terrible landscape of current labor law, which is very bad. And so I'm kind of turning my efforts to that, Larry, right now. Even at this horrible political moment of the beginning of Trump 2.0, I'm thinking maybe I really need to focus my efforts not on fussing about what Trump is doing, which is terrible, but on going back to my roots in a way about building the labor movement and building a kind of perhaps somewhat out of control movement of working people in this country. Because I think the working class, the multiracial working class, the northern, southern, eastern, western working class, the manufacturing, transportation, service sector working class, all parts of the working class, really they're so mad about what's happened to their lot and to the American dream and to the idea that their kids can do a little better than they did. And they want a union. And I want to help them demand one and see what happens.
Brilliant. I think your assessment is completely accurate. It seems that the left, and in particular the labor movement, sort of lost the narrative in a way that we protect the working class and that we care about the working class. What can we do to get that back?
You are so right. I mean, the idea that this billionaire or faux billionaire, now I guess he's a billionaire, whatever, Donald Trump, could be seen as the champion of the working class, and that the average working person looks at the party that brought them the right, freedom to form unions, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the minimum wage, the weekend, right, the 40-hour work week, all these things were all brought to them by Democrats, the whole basis of a decent working class life. And they look at that party, the Democratic Party, and they're like, well, it's not clear to me that's the party on my side. This other guy, he says whatever he wants. He tells it like it is. He seems brash, and maybe he can help me because really I'm living paycheck to paycheck and, so on and so forth. So I think that what the labor movement needs to do is it can still focus some on politics, but really it ought to turn its attention back fulsomely to its original purpose, which was not just looking after the last person who joined my union, but helping the next person who wants to join, and putting a huge amount of our resources into helping new workers organize and bargain first contracts. Because many of your viewers and listeners may know, but many may not, American labor law is so bad that even when you win a union, half the time you never get a first contract.
Right.
Our labor laws do basically, they don't make an employer bargain a first contract. They make an employer make good faith efforts to bargain a contract. And the definition of good faith efforts is pretty shocking. Like, for example, if we form a union and we're making $18 an hour, they can, in good faith, propose that our contract say we get $14 an hour. Like a huge pay cut. It's absurd, right?
It is.
It's obviously not in good faith, but good faith is defined as they show up at a bargaining table 5 or 6 times, they make some proposal, and then they can say, gee, we seem to be at an impasse. We're declaring that bargaining is at an impasse. And if you want to go on strike, you can. And by the way, if you go on strike, we'll permanently replace you. So, like, what rights do workers really have in this country? And so the way to draw attention to that, though, I don't think is to like talk about it as a human rights issue. We did a good job of that, I think, kind of back in the late 90s and early aughts. We had, 12, 15 Nobel Peace Laureates all signed something. I'm talking about like the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu and all those people signed something saying the freedom to form unions doesn't exist in the United States. There's a human rights problem. Human Rights Watch did big reports on this saying, wow, the U.S. is not in compliance with the fundamental requirements of the International Labor Organization Charter, which the U.S. signed, and and so on and so forth. That stuff's good. I'm not against it. I don't think we were wrong to try it. Okay, but look, all these failed efforts at labor law reform over these, from Carter to Biden, the only time we're going to get labor law reform, in my view, is if workers are organizing in such a way, and frankly, probably chaotically, because they're not going to get what they want and they're going to be mad, that the bosses say, as they did in 1935, when the workers were having strikes and demanding justice in the 30s, the employers went to Congress and said, look, this stuff has to be channeled somehow. This is too crazy. We can't have workers walking off the job all over the country and demanding this and that. We need a system for this. And so the National Labor Relations Act didn't just happen because Roosevelt, FDR was so great, which he was good, but it happened because workers were demanding change, and they were demanding it directly out there in the economy, in their workplace, in their industry, right? In their state, so that the Congress had to do something. So we're going to have to do what actually President Franklin Delano Roosevelt said to progressives in the 30s.
Right.
Make me do it. That's what he said, right? The labor movement needs to go out there and, I think, focus on organizing. Now, your question could be about also narrative and policy, and we could talk about all that. But my focus is really on action and on helping workers take action. And I think a lot of the narrative comes from somebody in Kokomo, Indiana, or Tampa, Florida, or Boise, Idaho, who's at some REI or Trader Joe's or some store saying, gee, I'm a single mom. I just tried to form a union and they fired me. And I just got the gold star for best employee last month. What's going on here? And, I don't want to see a lot of workers get fired, but I think we have to help brave American workers take steps to demand justice in their workplace and then help them tell their stories.
Related to the topic of workers organizing and facing resistance, there's an entire persuader industry that sort of thrives on workers not having the right to organize. What do you think about that? What could we do to tamp that down or make workers more aware of that so that they don't become victims to that industry?
Well, so you're talking about professional union busters, right?
Exactly.
That's what you mean.
Anti-union busters.
Yeah. So, this industry arose. First of all, let's look at the broader American history, right? Things may have gotten a little more sophisticated, right? But we always had Pinkertons, we always had private armies, we always had even police and National Guard being called out on behalf of employers and literally killing workers, killing miners. This happened throughout American history in the 1800s, the 1900s. And so there's always been employers using whatever tactics they can to suppress workers trying to organize. But since really the 70s and 80s and on up to today, law firms and independent union busters, consultants, have come in, and when workers are trying to afford a union at some company, the company pays huge amounts of money often to get these law firms to come in and try to scare the workers out of forming a union, and really kind of exhaust the workers out of forming a union, create so much conflict in the workplace. And the boss says, gee, this is all this conflict is here, not because I'm paying union busters millions of dollars to create the conflict. It can't, before you tried to form a union, there was no conflict, here, or this conflict wasn't here. So just if you walk away from this union thing, then we can all be at peace again. And you can work for whatever wage I give you and have whatever rights I give you, and shut the heck up, So, I actually think, I don't know, Larry, this might be a little controversial. I'm absolutely for policies that we have proposed in the PRO Act and that some states are pushing ahead with to try to tamp down on the outrageous behavior of union busters and these persuaders, including more transparency, right? That employers have to say who they're hiring to do this, that they have to say how much they're spending on this, and so on and so forth. And then, I don't think, this is America. It's supposed to be the land of the free, right? Many of your viewers may not know that your employer is allowed under U.S. labor law to require you to attend anti-union sessions that these union busters run. It could be in a room like this. We're here in the CAP Action Fund like this. It could be like the whole workforce in an audience. It also could be like this, one-on-one. Your supervisor can call you in, and you can be terminated for refusing this. And they could do it every day, twice a day, on work time. And then if you try to get any information about the union on work time, like if a union organizer says, well, hey, equal time, it's like an election that's going to happen, right? So no, there's none of that fairness that's in like a political election. So it's a really bad situation. I just think that workers, one of the things I think is so interesting about this question you ask is probably the number one argument, tactic in that way, persuader, as you said, right? Persuasion. Probably the number one argument that employers make in every campaign is, Larry, thanks for coming into my office. Let me just tell you, you and I have a good relationship, right? I've known you since you started here 12 years ago, right? I gave you those promotions, right? We don't want this union in here, then I can't talk to you anymore. Then there's a third party between us, and I can only talk to the union bargainer, which is totally false, right? But anyway, they're making this argument, right? And the union is like a third party that comes between us, right? So one of the things that's happening right now, Larry, that I think is so exciting is that there's a big new wave of workers organizing themselves, of less of a model of union organizing of a staff organizer from one of our great unions. Unite Here, CWA, SEIU, Teamsters, all our great unions, right? They are starting to look at new models and say, what if workers kind of organize themselves? And like I was involved in trying to support the Starbucks campaign, right? That was a worker-led campaign, truly. And they ended up, being part of Workers United, which is part of SEIU. But when the union buster came in and said, Larry, you're such a great barista, but we don't want some third party. And you're like, whoa, boss, this union's just us, and it's really powerful. So I think part of the way to answer that, I know we need policy change. I just don't think we're going to get it. Larry, I'm sick of waiting. I'm not waiting anymore. We need to take action and help workers organize in spite of everything. And I think looking at new models and unleashing young people to lead their own campaigns. I think a lot, I'm 64, right? I think a lot of union leaders are more like my age, right? Than some, just hired barista. There could be a just hired barista my age, right? But many of them are in their 20s and 30s, right? And I have this belief in American workers that they know how to organize themselves with support, right? I'm not saying just throw them out to the lions of corporate America. They would get slaughtered by these union busters. But if you do strategic research, right, and help determine what companies make sense to organize because there's leverage to win, right? And if you give some organizing support so that they have someone to talk to and learn how to file for an election or whatever they need to do, and some communication support, not to take over from them, not to be the communicator, but to support workers. If you give them just some support, I think workers can beat union busters in America. And in any event, that fight needs to be the story of the American working class. And then I think politicians forget about party. If this is happening on some kind of scale, and if politicians don't get behind workers who are organizing like this and show up for them and support them vocally, I think they're going to lose the confidence of working people. And so I think it can affect our politics even before we get labor law reform.
I can definitely relate to the idea of workers organizing themselves. Of course, we started our union, Progressive Workers Union.
Yeah, you're one of them.
Right.
You're one of them who succeeded. You didn't just start it, you organized a new union.
That's right. Completely independent union. Very powerful. Represents Sierra Club, 350, Greenpeace, and more groups. Worker driven, worker led. And it's been growing consistently since, we sort of reestablished the union. But I think a lot of people will ask when they watch this, how does that work at scale, especially when the NLRB has been dismantled? We had the head of the NLRB being fired for the first time in 90 years, head of the EEOC. So if we don't have Section 7 and 8 to sort of be the sort of a balancer between employer and union power, what do we do? How do we get these elections to happen? Should we just look outside of the traditional model? What do you think?
Well, I think those are great questions. And I think the first thing to say is I don't have the answers to them. It's not like I have like a whole playbook and I can see into the future, right? But I feel like we can learn some lessons from history, and we can think about resources. So what I think the labor movement needs to go back to our roots, which is like it's you and me.
Right.
We're working in some place and we are the union, right? The workers are the union, not some great American institution like the United Auto Workers or the Teamsters, right? And UFCW, all are great unions, right? They are a union, of course, but we working in this place, we're the union, right? We're going to start there. And I think that when we help workers organize and lead their organizing, and then some of our unions are going to say, whoa, those workers, wait, you can't help those workers organize outside of us. We are the fill in the blank, the union in that industry, right? These are, auto workers or, restaurant workers or grocery store workers or healthcare workers. There's unions that, and my thing is to help workers organize in a way where they can still be in charge and not like broker them, not act like a boss where you're like, I will deliver. Don't worry, Union X, I will deliver these workers to you. But say, look, if the union is really interested and if those workers want to affiliate with a given union, fantastic, right? But we're going to have to see them through winning and even getting a first contract with the model that has integrity of a worker-led thing, right? And if a union that the workers say, hey, we're interested in affiliating with X union, and if that union wants to assist, right, the effort, you talk about resources, right, that would be fine, right? So I think this isn't there's not like a simplistic outside or inside thing. I think there's principles
Right.
of workers being in charge of their own campaigns, building, like I was off, I had a long weekend vacation with a friend of mine who, worked with me in the labor movement for years. He's retired now, but he was bargained thousands of contracts, hundreds of contracts. I said, dude, you're going to come out of retirement. You're going to be a consultant on this, right? You're going to come and say, we're going to say to workers at some company that are trying to organize, hey, you can start thinking about what you want in your first contract right now, even though there's only 5 places organized and there's 300 in the country, or what, I'm making these numbers up, right? So this guy who's such an experienced bargainer will help them and help them understand, like, again, we got to support them, right? Like, hey, what could a bargaining committee be? It could have someone from this is 2025, right? We can have a Zoom with hundreds of people from every facility, right? We can really empower workers to participate. Let's start making our bargaining proposals right now as part of the campaign, right? And when the boss says, hey, you're not going to get anything, or we're going to go backwards, or, the union buster comes in and does their thing, the workers are like, wait, we already have a national bargaining committee. We already have our proposals together. You should see them. We're really proud of them. I think we can really change the narrative on how this happens somewhat with creativity. And I think we can bring resources to it. People who say you can't just have workers go out there on their own and organize. I certainly agree in the sense that people need resources, people need support. But I think that if we can build something where workers are organizing on some scale, I think, first of all, people who understand that unless we return to a kind of a union density, as you said, or a percentage of the workers in this country having unions that's way closer to the middle of the 20th century than it is to right now, or to the 1920s and early 30s, there's no hope for change in this country. I guess I think about this a little differently than a lot of people, Larry. If you ask most political activists, policy wonks, progressives, whatever, what's the one thing you change in this country, right? Or to change everything else? There's a lot of smart things people might say, like the Supreme Court, reform the Supreme Court, get dark money out of politics, or get big money out of politics, right? They could say a lot of things, right, that really need to be changed. I would say if you can get union density back up to, even a quarter of workers, but a third of workers, politics in America would be completely transformed.
Different. Absolutely.
The working class is not white guys in hard hats, right? It's multiracial, coast to coast, immigrants and native-born people, women, men, non-binary people. It's every kind of person. And a union is really the only place. Even generally, a church or a synagogue or a mosque doesn't bring people together, right, across all these divides. You go, like when I walked the picket line during the stand-up strike, at the UAW. I'm from Detroit, right? So we went out to one of those places. I took my dad out there. He was 92 at the time. It was awesome. But you had demographically every kind of person, and politically, there were totally Trump supporters walking the picket line. And what an amazing thing, right? To bring working people together across their differences. There's no other place to do that like the labor movement. And I think it would transform American politics and get us out of this terrible place we're in, where working people don't see hope in an effective government.
I totally agree. And another thing that workers are really, really worried about is the onset of AI.
Yeah.
And, it is a fact that right now there are some jobs being lost from AI because, people are using AI to do their design work.
Yep.
They're using it for their writing, for their translation. And some of the creative industries that we thought would be the last ones to be disappearing are starting to change now. There's a great report I'll actually link to this video here about the industries that are being impacted directly. And, one of the things that I've been talking to union leaders about is governance, the governance of language models by unions. Alvin Velasquez, who used to work at SEIU, who's now a professor, did a great paper talking about how unions should be a part of how this stuff is created, rolled out, et cetera. Really, what I want unions to do is get away from that instinct of just saying no to something as opposed to being involved in the conversation, being at the table,
getting out front of it.
Getting out front of it.
Yeah.
And, it's a fact that AI is here. It is here to stay. And in some ways, it's become a buzzword, right? Where it doesn't actually mean anything, but there is an application of these tools. So I'm curious, how are you looking at that in terms of workers, how it can either help workers, how it can harm workers, or how it could just change the way the labor market exists?
Yeah, such important questions. Let me start in a broad place about technology and work, right, and workers and the quality of work and whether their job exists, right? And it's very much on the theme we've been talking about, that the key is workers having unions. Okay, let's look at Sweden, right? What percentage of Swedish workers are represented by unions?
I'm going to say at least 50%.
It's like it's either 70 or 90.
Yeah,
It's like
it's way up
way up there,
It's way
right?
up there.
Okay. Swedish workers in general have way less fear of technological change than American workers. And why? Because they have a union. Things have to be bargained. They have structures in the economy because of their unions where everything's discussed, and they're simply not going to be displaced by technological change. And one of the big lies about unions that employers tell is, oh, unions are inefficient. They make a company inefficient, or they kill creativity. Really? Why is the most unionized industry like the film industry? Our creative, all big recording artists, all big hip hop or jazz or, classical music stars, all movie actors.
Screen Actors Guild.
Yeah,
Writers
they're all
Guild.
the writers, right? Even all the creatives are all unionized, right? So it's nonsense. But in Sweden, and anywhere, if you work for a company, you want your company to be competitive. You want to keep your job, right? You want to have your economic security. So you want your company to win, right, in the economy. So workers are for change if it's not going to cost them their job, right? So I think in a highly unionized economy, or the unions that exist now in the United States looking to move in the right direction, absolutely should say, hey, let's be sophisticated about technological change, right? Let's look at this. Let's see what's coming. Let's see how workers can have input into it and shape a future that's good for workers. And, really, Larry, the labor movement started, and at its best, it's always not just been about a contract for me, about my wages, hours, working conditions. Yep. It's about the broader working class and actually society. And, when John Kenneth Galbraith, the great economist of the time of the New Deal and the Great Depression, he predicted by way before now we'd hardly be working because productivity would continue to rise and rise and rise. And productivity, he was right about productivity, but somehow all the benefits of that have gone to a teensy number of people. So we've got the world's richest guy right now saying he's taking a wood chipper to USAID, our foreign aid program. Okay, that's 1% of our whole budget. Here's a guy who has more wealth personally than all of Bangladesh, cutting off vital nutrition programs for severely malnourished babies in Bangladesh and 70 other countries, or Lord knows how many, but I'm just giving one example. It's an obscenity, right? And unions need to lead American society in moving towards a just world where we get 8 hours for work, or maybe 6, maybe we need less and less. But the old expression was 8 hours to work, 8 hours to rest, and 8 hours for what we will, for leisure, right? And that's what the labor movement kind of won in America in the middle of the last century. If you take AI seriously, if you look at it, the labor movement could see it as a new tool to move towards the next step of an economy where workers have better jobs, not worse, and they have better lives. And maybe we all can work fewer hours, but let's figure it out together with workers having a big seat at the table. And the problem with the whole thing is right now they don't.
Got it. You mentioned the Trump administration's DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency. There's been a lot of sort of outcry about the tactics that have been used by DOGE. And also people have said that the sort of savings that they're supposedly making are fake because they're looking at the ceiling of contracts, government contracts, and they're cutting, they're sort of overestimating. And I think we really won't know in full what's happening until maybe after the administration is over. But what's your take on this? I mean, the unions that got involved in the lawsuits, like American Federation of Government Employees, APGE, SEIU, the American Federation of Labor, they were successful at least delaying a lot of this stuff and bringing transparency to some of it, putting it through the courts. How do you feel about our sort of possibility as a labor movement of being sort of a transit for making sure that justice remains a priority in the next 4 years?
From my point of view, what Musk and Doge are doing is immoral, illegal, unconstitutional, and there's so many specific things they're doing. You know, it's all wrong, but a lot of it is straight up illegal. And I am glad that the AFL-CIO and some of the unions, the great public sector unions that are out there, that they're filing lawsuits, that they're speaking up, that they're having demonstrations. I think they should do, more and more of it. So I think there's a real opportunity here because people are shocked. A lot of people are in a defensive crouch. A lot of people are demoralized, depressed. They don't know what to do. I think there's a vacuum of leadership. There's a real yearning for strategies. And so I think there's a space for the labor movement to really step up and lead on the great dilemma to me, Larry, is how much are you just kind of resisting Trump and how much are you putting forth a positive mission, vision of America.
Correct.
Right. And I think, in the last election, both with President Biden and then Vice President Harris, there was too much of like how terrible Trump would be and not enough of a positive vision. Like, for example, I love Vice President Harris's proposal that Medicare would cover home care. That's so sensible, so right. As just an American, person who has a mother-in-law who just passed away, but we're trying to keep her at home, who has a dad who's 93. We all are dealing with this, right, with our elders. And it's more dignified, it's more efficient. You can actually save the taxpayers money. Right? Anyway, she mentioned that and then it kind of went away. So I think we need a balance of resistance and calling out all these bad things, but also pointing towards okay, so we don't want the fake billionaire version of something that's good for American taxpayers, citizens, workers. We want the real version. And, what would that be, right? Let's make Social Security, let's not raid Medicaid. Let's make Social Security solid into the next century and increase benefits. Let's turn it into a real pension for workers, right? And not give it to Wall Street to make profits off of. I mean, there's so many areas. A place like Center for American Progress here could perhaps host like a shadow cabinet like European countries do in Canada, when the party that's out of power, the group that's out of power, organizes itself to put different proposals. So I think there's many things that can happen. We're still in the early days, but there has been a blizzard of straight up illegal stuff. The idea that Musk wants to see into your Social Security file or your IRS file, it's outrageous. There's why? It's not about saving money, And as you said, I think it's even stronger than you said. The information they're putting out there about how much money they're saving is completely bogus. And the press is doing a decent job, at least in the first moments here, of saying there's no basis for this. There's no transparency here. And they're not saving anything like this money. And also all around the country, like I watch the Michigan press more than, the Arizona or Montana or whatever, some other state. But I'm sure in all these states, there's press like in Michigan where some woman who is works for the U.S. Department of Agriculture and works on firefighting and preventing forest fires and stuff, just because she happened to switch jobs within the USDA. She's a longtime federal employee. But, when you move to a new job, then you're on probation in the new job. So they're firing hundreds and thousands of these probationary workers, and they're saying it's for performance when it's a complete lie. It's just because they can fire them because of their probationary status. They're just looking for an excuse to chop away, and they're chopping muscle, right? And so this woman's the one story, there's 5 or 10 today just in Michigan that I saw. She's like a single mom of 3 kids who's like, gee, I just got an award for my work last month. And then this is sort of like a promotion going over to this new job. And then they're firing me. What am I supposed to do? So I think the American people are not going to like this. And we have to tell this story. And the labor movement since it's about workers and public workers and the great contributions they make to our quality of life, I think it's great if AFGE and the National Treasury Employees Union's been really big on this, and other public sector unions, federal unions, and the labor movement at large really leads on this.
Wonderful. So this has been a great conversation. I think we should end with a question related to what you think workers should be doing over the next 4 years to help in their community, whether that's the workplace, whether that's in their neighborhood. What can they do to empower themselves and make sure that there is hope for them and their families?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I guess I sort of have a two-part answer to it. One, sticking with my theme about, organizing. But before I get to that, we're all whole human beings. We're not just a worker. I'm not just a nurse or a truck driver or, a lawyer or whatever. We're whole human beings. Some people, because of some illness in their family, might really be into some cause about medical research, right? Some people might really be freaking out about how we're drastically overheating this planet and it's a huge disaster, right? I really encourage people not to be demoralized by the blizzard. You're being buried in horrible things. Take that thing that is your passion, beyond your work perhaps, right? That cause, education, K-12 education, so many, whatever it is, helping our elders, have a dignified life, and work on that in your spare time. Be active on that in your community to resist what's happening and to present good alternatives. But my second part is, it's really this, Larry, the exit polls that have come out about this election, about November 2024, have shown that union members and even people in union households, so not just you, the union worker, but your spouse or your adult kids, whatever, voted more for Harris than non-union workers in household, as much as they did. So in 2024, they voted more for the pro-worker candidate as much as in 2020 when Biden was running, or in 2016, when Hillary Clinton was the candidate. And so people can fuss about how many union members show up to vote and how good our performance was, as a labor movement politically. That's what I see as the denominator. But I think every person should focus on the denominator. There's just not enough union members. Union households and union members vote way more for the pro-worker candidate, right? So if instead of 6% of private sector workers were in unions, if 12 and 24 and 36% were, you could never have somebody like Donald Trump win an election. Because let's go back to our very first point. Unions are organizations that workers create and pay for themselves. And so when an election rolls around and I get a card in the mail that's from my union, that's my local union, Larry, in Poughkeepsie, New York, or Des Moines, Iowa, wherever I live, right? It says, here's the candidates. We've done the research. We are nurses. We know who's good for hospitals or nursing homes, right? This is the slate of candidates that's good for us as county road commission workers, whatever we are, right? Workers look at that and they're like, not all of them, right? Some of them vote for all kinds of reasons. This is America, right? They might vote for terrible reasons, or don't take my guns away, or, all kinds of specific things, reproductive rights, all kinds. But union members and people in their households see that information from their local union and their national union as kind of objective information in their own interest, and they act on it. So what I say to people is, if you want to try to have the country go in a more constructive direction, form a union, organize a union where you work, help your kids, help your neighbors, help your sister, organize a union where they work. Let's get a lot more people into unions, and then the country will change directions. So that's my kind of two-part answer.
Wonderful. Well, Rep. Andy Levin, thank you for joining us at the Center for American Progress Action Fund. And Union Base would love to have you again at some point. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Larry. Thanks for what you're doing with Union Base. I follow along as best I can. It's very exciting.
Thank you. Thank you so much.